As we've mentioned, Athletes in Action is really much more than just the basketball team that you're watching compete at this particular time. Actually, AIA has 2 basketball teams, 2 wrestling teams, weightlifting, track and field, gymnastics, professional tennis, and professional football. Throughout the course of the season, we're going to be showing you all of AIA's various sports activities, and in this first show, we'll be touching on a number of those. It all really began with basketball for Athletes in Action, however, and what better man to describe the beginnings of this tremendous athletic endeavor than the National Director of AIA, Dave Hanna.
You know, the Athletes in Action basketball story is truly a remarkable story. I remember seeing the New Folk, a singing group, a few years ago and thinking to myself, boy, they really were able to use their musical background as an opportunity to share their faith. And I thought, it'd be tremendous if we could use athletics in the same way. And I thought, how could you fill up a gymnasium better than with a basketball team? And I talked to Larry Treganin, who had just joined our staff, and Larry had been the captain of the University of Michigan basketball team the year before. And I said, Larry, what do you think about a basketball team that play the major universities across the country, and at halftime we'd speak to the audience? And he thought it was a great idea, so we called Dave Strack and Johnny Wooden, the UCLA coach, and we talked to them about the concept, and both coaches thought it was a good idea, but they didn't see how we could play anybody because their schedules were already done. I remember Johnny said that unless we can get an extra game, the major schools couldn't play us. So we thought, well, maybe it can be done, and so we went out and started talking to some basketball players, see if they'd come with us. Well, the problem we ran into is the players weren't interested in coming with a team that didn't have a schedule. On the other hand, we found that we couldn't really get a schedule without a team, and it was kind of a paradox. But I started giving up on the idea. But later that year, we were speaking at a banquet at the University of California at Berkeley. And after the banquet, I got talking with the athletic director, Pete Newell. Pete was very interested in amateur basketball at that time and said, look, Dave, maybe we can do something about this. I'll write a letter to the NCAA and see how they respond. Well, we got a letter back from the NCAA and said, we've just set up the Basketball Federation, and if you join it, you can play the universities as an extra game. And I remember they kind of pulled me off the ceiling. I said, boy, we're in business, you know, we've got it made. Well, I was a little naive, I guess, because I didn't realize the incredible job that we had left. So Larry and I got an airplane, and we flew back to Louisville, Kentucky for the National Basketball Coaches Convention. Well, we got back there, and we'd go up and we'd see a coach and say, hey, Coach, I'm Dave Hanna, and we're starting a basketball team called Athletes in Action, and we'd like to play you. Well, the coaches would pull out their schedule, and before we left, we had finished building a 26-game schedule against the major universities across the country. And not one single coach had asked us how many guys we had on the team. We were fortunate because we only had one ball player at that time. So here we were. We got back home with this fantastic schedule against the top schools around the country, and I thought, now we've got to have a team for sure. And so we started calling ball players, and finally, by summertime, we had 7 ball players who were coming with us, but we didn't have a coach. And we'd probably have one of the few teams in the world that the players have ever recruited the coach. But that summer, Fred Kroll, who had been the head coach at the University of Alaska, decided to go back and get his doctorate. And he came down to Arrowhead Springs on his way to the University of New Mexico, stopped in for a couple days, and the players recruited him. And he stayed for 4 years to coach our team. And I think probably one of the highlights of the year for me was about 1 month before our first game against the University of Utah, we got 3 more ball players, and we finally had 10 guys. And this was our first scrimmage. We finally could scrimmage. And we went on up to play the University of Utah, and we'd gotten a scouting report that Utah had a good team. But the next night, we played Wichita State, and our scouting report was that they were really tough. Well, we got up to Utah a couple of days ahead of time, and we saw their freshman team play the varsity, and the varsity looked good, but we felt we could handle them. And we had a sellout crowd for the game that night, and I thought we were going to handle them by 10, 15 points, and by halftime they were ahead of us by 18 points. And I just felt terrible. You know, we got up to speak at halftime and talk about excitement in the Christian life and victory, you know, and we were down by 18 points. And yet we told them, if you're interested in what we have to say, we'll take some more time after the game. And Utah beat us by 22 points that night, and it was tough losing by so much. But almost half of that audience stayed for about 15 minutes after the game was over to hear what our players had to say. And it was remarkable, really, the response of the audience. And we went to bed, and we got up the next morning, 5:30 in the morning. We flew from Salt Lake City to Denver. We stayed in the airport for about 4 hours, caught a flight to Wichita, got in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The people that were picking us up didn't show up. We just took everything, and we rented cabs, and we went out to the gym. And, of course, Wichita State's got a beautiful gym, seats about 11,000 people. We were told that it was a sellout crowd. We worked out for a few minutes before the game, and about 5 minutes before the game started, there were about 2,000 people there. And about 1 minute after the game started, there were about 10,500. Just the last minute, that whole place filled up. And I just thought, we're going to get beat by 100 points. This will be one of the greatest disgraces in basketball history. And yet the guys played an incredible game. At halftime, we were ahead by 2. And believe me, it was a lot easier to speak at halftime when you're ahead by 2 points. Wichita went on to beat us by 8, but we really played them a good game. And the next week, we went up and played the University of Oregon, and we beat them. And I realized that we were really in business, and we could play the major college, and we could really hold our own against them. And this was how our basketball team got started. And as the years progressed, we realized that we really needed to try to upgrade the quality of our team. And we set a goal for ourselves to build the top amateur team in the world. And it became evident that coaching was one of the most important factors. And 2 years ago, we decided that it was necessary to bring in a top college coach. And I had a good friend that I tried to recruit for about a month. And he finally told me, he said, you know, my family situations are such that I really can't move now, but Jim King is about ready to retire from the Chicago Bulls, and I believe he'd be a good man for you. So I called Jim up on the phone, and Jim didn't know me from Adam, but he'd heard of Athletes in Action, and I told him about our team and what we were doing, and he was interested. And after the Bulls had finished their playoff with the Lakers out in L.A., he flew over to Phoenix and brought his wife over, and we sat down and we talked about the possibility of his coming with us. And Jim, in the meantime, got some offers from some real outstanding universities. But he made up his mind that this would be one of the most strategic ways he could invest his life. And so last year, Jim came to coach the team. And it's been remarkable to see what's happened because of Jim's coaching. The best team we'd ever produced was 2 years ago on our East basketball team, and we'd won 15-14. Or we'd won 15 games and lost 14. But when Jim came with us, he turned our basketball program around last year. We won 25 games and lost 11, and of course we play every game on the road. And I remember Jim telling me before the season started, he said, Dave, he said, we'll win 20 and lose 10. And we added some more games, and Jim lived up to what he said. And he's just done a remarkable job, not only as a coach, but building the rapport and the respect of the men. And I think that Jim is really going to build just a super program for us. I remember asking him, I said, Jim, do you think you can take a team like ours and build them into a real winner, a world champion on the amateur level? And he said, Dave, he said, I never lost in high school, I never lost in college, I never lost in the pros. He said, we're going to win. And that's exactly what Jim's been doing, and it's just great having him on board. I think Jim has been a tremendous asset to us in a number of ways. First of all, the fact he was a very, very successful player with the Chicago Bulls as a player and a coach has given a great deal of credibility to the program we're trying to develop. It's been a tremendous asset to the players we're trying to recruit and giving them confidence. Also the universities that we're playing. I think they realize we're serious about developing one of the top amateur teams in the world. I think several other ways that Jim is a tremendous asset to us is the players themselves have a tremendous love and respect for Jim. Last year one of the players told me, he said, Dave, he says, you know, we'd walk on burning coals for Jim if he asked us to. And then I think possibly more important than anything else is that Jim gives the men confidence. He's a winner, he's had a tremendously successful background, and the men themselves believe they're going to win with Jim as a coach. Last year we won almost every close game we played. And this excites me, that the men feel that they really can win with Jim as their coach.